She grabbed the little girl's hand and pulled her behind her wheelchair like a shield. Security guards were already moving. Executives froze. And Marcus Reed stood in the middle of that marble lobby, heart hammering, watching the most powerful woman in the building hold his 6-year-old daughter like she was something worth protecting. Nobody in that room had ever seen Victoria Hale protect anything except her bottom line. But Emma had just called her mommy in front of everyone, and the word didn't make Victoria flinch. It made her fight. Drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. This one's going to break you wide open. The elevator doors opened at 11:47 p.m., and Marcus Reed stepped out onto the 32nd floor, carrying a mop, a bucket, and a secret that could cost him everything he had left. He moved fast. He always moved fast on this floor, the executive level, the floor where people like him weren't supposed to linger. He kept his head down, his cartwheels quiet against the marble, and his eyes away from the framed portraits of board members lining the corridor walls. Men and women who would never know his name. Men and women who ate lunches that cost more than his weekly paycheck. He didn't resent them. He couldn't afford to. Resentment was a luxury. Marcus Reed was running on something much more basic than resentment. He was running on desperation, the kind that wakes a man up at 3 a.m., not from nightmares, but from math. From the cold arithmetic of rent minus wages, minus groceries, minus the electric bill that was already 2 weeks past due. He pushed the cart around the corner, checked the hallway in both directions, and then doubled back toward the service stairwell. He went down 4 flights. He knocked twice on the steel door marked Maintenance Authorized Personnel Only. 3 seconds of silence. Then a small voice from inside, "Daddy." He exhaled. Every single night that one word unknotted something inside his chest. "Yeah, baby, it's me." He pushed the door open. Emma was curled up in the corner of the room, on a folded moving blanket, her backpack wedged under her head like a pillow, a worn copy of Charlotte's Web open across her chest. She blinked up at him with her mother's eyes dark soft, impossibly trusting. And Marcus felt the familiar collision inside him, love so fierce it almost hurt, and guilt so heavy it never quite left. "You ate?" he asked. "Peanut butter sandwich, and the apple." She held up the apple core as evidence. "Good girl." "Daddy, I heard someone outside earlier." He went still. "What kind of someone?" "Wheels," Emma said simply. "Like a chair with wheels. Going really slow. Back and forth. Back and forth." She paused. It sounded lonely. Marcus crouched down beside her and kept his voice even. "Did you open the door?" "No." She looked at him like the answer was obvious. "You said never open the door." "That's right." He kissed her forehead. "That's exactly right. Go back to sleep. I'll be done by 3. He tucked the blanket tighter around her shoulders, turned off the small battery lamp, and stood there in the dark for a moment longer than he needed to, just listening to her breathe. "Wheels," she'd said, "going really slow, back and forth." He filed it away. Probably building security, probably nothing. He had bigger problems to carry. He went back to work. Here's what Marcus never told anyone, because there was no one left to tell. 14 months ago, his wife Diane had been sitting in their kitchen, making lunches for the week she did that every Sunday, 7 days of lunches lined up on the counter, like a little army when she said her head hurt. By Tuesday, she was in the ICU. By the following Sunday, Marcus was standing at a graveside in the rain, holding Emma's hand, trying to figure out how a man explains to a 5-year-old that the person who made their lunches every week is never coming back. He'd had a decent job then. Mid-level logistics coordinator at a shipping company. Not rich, but steady. Enough. But grief does strange things to a person's ability to show up on time, to concentrate, to care about spreadsheets when the house still smells like her perfume. He lasted 4 months before they let him go. Restructuring, they called it. He didn't fight it. He barely felt it. Then came the scramble. Gig work. Warehouse shifts. a stint driving delivery trucks that left him gone 16 hours a day, and Emma with a neighbor who charged $40 every time and couldn't always do it. The janitor job at Hale Industries was actually a step up. Benefits, consistent hours, overnight, which meant Emma could be with him instead of bouncing between whoever was available. Except bringing a child into a corporate building at night was explicitly against every policy Marcus had signed his name to. He knew that. He brought her anyway, because the alternative was leaving Emma alone in an apartment where the hallway light had been broken for 3 weeks, and the neighbor down the hall played music so loud the walls vibrated, and Marcus was not going to leave his 6-year-old daughter alone at midnight in a building where nobody would hear her if she was scared. So he signed the policies, and he broke them quietly. And he lived every single night with the fear that tonight would be the night someone found out. He was a man walking a tightrope over everything he had left, and he had gotten very good at not looking down. The first time Emma met Victoria Hale, Marcus didn't know it was happening. It was a Tuesday, he remembered, because Tuesdays were when he buffed the lobby floors, which took longer and put him behind schedule. He'd gotten Emma settled in the basement room just after midnight, given her the lamp and her book, told her 20 minutes of reading and then sleep. He'd been on his knees, scrubbing a baseboard in the second-floor corridor, when he heard Emma's voice, bright and entirely too loud, coming from somewhere below him. His blood went cold. He took the stairs 2 at a time. He came around the corner of the first-floor corridor and stopped dead. Emma was standing in the center of the hallway in her pajamas, the ones with the little yellow stars, looking up at a woman in a sleek black wheelchair with the completely unguarded curiosity that only young children are capable of. The woman was Victoria Hale. Marcus knew her face from the portrait in the lobby. The sharp jaw, the dark eyes that seemed to be calculating something even in a photograph. In person, she was smaller somehow. Not physically, but in some other way he couldn't name right then. She was wearing a cashmere robe over what appeared to be expensive pajamas, her black hair loose around her shoulders, and she was looking down at Emma with an expression Marcus had never seen on a CEO's face before. She looked surprised. Not angry, not threatening, just surprised, like a person who had forgotten what it felt like to be caught off guard by something good. Emma, for her part, was pointing at Victoria's wheelchair. "Is that yours?" she asked. Victoria blinked. "Yes." "Can you go fast in it?" A pause. "Sometimes." "My friend Tyler has a scooter, and he goes really fast," Emma said with the gravity of someone sharing important information. "He crashed into a mailbox once." Something moved across Victoria's face, just briefly, that looked almost like the beginning of a smile. Marcus crossed the corridor in 5 steps and put his hand on Emma's shoulder. "I'm so sorry," he said, and he meant it on about 6 different levels simultaneously. "She shouldn't be. She's not supposed to." "I'm sorry, Ms. Hale." The woman's eyes moved to him, those dark, measuring eyes. "She's yours," Victoria said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am, she is, and I promise this won't—" "What's her name?" Marcus hesitated. "Emma." Victoria looked back down at the child. Emma was still staring at the wheelchair with undisguised interest, the way kids stare at things they find genuinely fascinating rather than uncomfortable. "Emma," Victoria said, like she was testing the weight of it. "Hi," said Emma. "I'm supposed to be sleeping, but I heard your wheels." "You heard my—" Victoria stopped. "The wheels on my chair. They go really quiet," Emma said admiringly, like they're trying not to wake anybody up. There was a silence in that hallway that Marcus couldn't quite read. He stood there with his hand on his daughter's shoulder, waiting for the axe to fall, waiting for Victoria Hale to reach for her phone and call security and end every fragile thing he'd managed to hold together. Instead, Victoria looked at him, really looked at him, and said, "How old is she?" "6. "Why is she here?" Marcus opened his mouth, closed it. There were 100 polished HR-approved lies he could have told. Instead, what came out was the truth, blunt and exhausted. I don't have anyone to leave her with, and I'm not leaving her alone." Another silence. Longer this time. Victoria's jaw shifted. Something moved behind her eyes that Marcus couldn't name, something complicated, like a door opening onto a room that hadn't been visited in a very long time. "Go back to work, Mr. Reed. Marcus Reed." Mr. Reed. She turned her chair around slowly, beginning to move back down the hallway. "I didn't see anything tonight." Marcus stood there stunned. Emma waved at the retreating figure. "Night," she called after her, cheerful and unbothered the way children are when they haven't yet learned to be afraid of powerful people. Victoria didn't turn around, but she stopped moving just for a second. Just long enough that Marcus, watching from behind, was almost certain he saw her shoulders lift once like a sharp breath in before she continued down the hall. That was 3 months ago. In those 3 months, a lot of things had happened that Marcus only understood in pieces because he was always tired, always working, always chasing the impossible balance between keeping Emma safe and keeping himself employed. What he didn't fully see, because he couldn't see everything at once, was that Emma had begun slipping out of the basement room on certain nights. Not every night. Not recklessly. But on the nights when she heard the quiet wheels in the hallway, she would wait until she was sure the hallway was empty of other staff, and then she would push the door open just enough, and Victoria would be there. Not accidentally. Not anymore. They had a spot, Emma told him later, when everything came apart and the secrets finally poured out. A small alcove off the main corridor on the building's ground floor near the back elevator that Victoria used when she didn't want to deal with the lobby. There was a padded bench built into the wall, and Emma would sit on it with her book or her drawings, and Victoria would park her chair beside her and they would talk. Or rather, Emma would talk with the breathless generosity of a child who has something to say about everything, and Victoria would listen in the careful way of someone who had gone a very long time without anyone talking to them, like they were simply a person. Not a CEO, not a symbol, not an inspiration or a tragedy. Just a person in a chair who had wheels that went quiet so they wouldn't wake anybody up. Emma told her about Charlotte's Web, and about Tyler's mailbox, and about the way her mother used to make pancakes on Saturday mornings with blueberries, and how the kitchen had smelled like something warm that Emma couldn't find words for, but that she missed every single day, like a missing tooth her tongue kept finding. And Victoria, slowly, cautiously, like a person approaching a fire they're not sure they're allowed to stand near, told Emma small things in return. That she liked the rain, that she used to play piano before the accident, that sometimes the building felt very large and very empty at night. "That's why you come down here," Emma said one night with 6-year-old certainty. "Because it's too quiet up there." "Yes," Victoria said, and her voice was stripped of everything she usually used to protect herself. "That's exactly why." Emma considered this seriously. Then she scooted over on the bench and patted the space beside her. "You can sit here. It's less quiet when someone's next to you." And the woman who had managed a billion-dollar corporation with titanium composure sat in her wheelchair in a hallway alcove at 1 a.m. and read Charlotte's Web out loud to a 6-year-old because the child asked her to. Because the child asked her like it was the most natural thing in the world. Because the child had no idea that natural things had stopped feeling natural to Victoria Hale a very long time ago. Marcus found out the nights were happening the way parents always find out things too late after the fact when the evidence is undeniable. He came down to check on Emma at 1:15 a.m. on a Wednesday and found the basement room empty, the blanket folded neatly, the book left open face down, like Emma always did when she intended to come back. His heart seized. He went looking quietly controlled, because panicking in a corporate building at 1 a.m. with your unauthorized child loose on the premises was not a situation that responded well to panic. He found them in the alcove, Emma cross-legged on the bench, Victoria beside her book in hand. They were both laughing at something, a real laugh, quiet but genuine, the kind that catches you off guard, and the sound of it stopped Marcus in the corridor doorway in a way he couldn't immediately explain. He had not heard Emma laugh like that since before Diane died. He hadn't heard it at all, And now, here it was, his daughter's laugh in the middle of the night in a corporate building beside a woman Marcus had assumed existed in a different universe from his entirely. Victoria looked up and saw him. The laughter stopped. Her expression shifted, not cold exactly, but the shudders came back. Professional. Composed. Careful. Emma looked up too. "Daddy, Ms. Victoria knows how spiders make webs. She explained it to me. It's because of spinnerets, that's a real word, Daddy, she showed me." Spinneret. Victoria confirmed, her voice back to its normal register-controlled precise, like she'd just been reminded who she was supposed to be. Marcus looked at his daughter, then at the CEO, then at his daughter again. "Emma," he said carefully, "how many times have you two—" "Wednesdays and Fridays," Emma said. "Sometimes Mondays." Marcus closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, Victoria was watching him with an expression he still couldn't fully read. Not guilt, not defiance, something quieter than both. "Mr. Reed," she said, "I owe you an explanation." "Ms. Hale," he said, "I think we both have some explaining to do." Emma looked between them with the calm assessment of a child who has decided the adults are about to have a talk she isn't needed for. "I'll wait here," she announced, and opened her book. Marcus and Victoria looked at each other over the head of the child between them. And for the first time since his wife died, Marcus Reed had the strange, disorienting feeling that something in his life had shifted quietly in the dark while he wasn't watching, and that whatever it was, it had been moving for much longer than he knew. The conversation happened standing up, which felt right somehow, because neither of them was quite ready to settle into it. Emma had her book. Victoria had rolled her chair a few feet down the alcove, just enough to give the illusion of privacy. Marcus stood with his arms crossed, not in anger, but in the posture of a man holding himself together through sheer physical effort, and he looked at the most powerful woman in the building and said the thing that had been sitting in his chest since he walked down that corridor and heard his daughter laugh. "How long have you known she was coming out?" Victoria didn't flinch. "About 6 weeks." 6 weeks. He repeated it quietly. Not an accusation. A reckoning. "She knocked on my chair the first time," Victoria said. "I was in the hallway. She came out of the stairwell door, and she walked right up to me and knocked on the armrest like it was a front door." Something shifted briefly in her expression. "I didn't know what to do with that." "Nobody ever knocks on your chair. Nobody ever treats it like furniture," she said. "They either stare at it or they pretend it doesn't exist. She stopped, pressed her lips together. "She knocked. And then she asked if I wanted company." Marcus looked at Emma, who was reading with complete innocence, mouthing the words slightly the way she always did when she was deeply into a chapter. "She's been doing this on her own," he said, "without me knowing." "Yes." He rubbed his face with one hand. "Ms. Hale, I have to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer me directly." "All right. Is she safe with you?" The question landed in the space between them and stayed there. Victoria didn't rush to answer, which Marcus found he respected, because a person who rushes to answer, "Of course she's safe," usually hasn't thought about what safety actually costs. Instead, Victoria said it quietly, and with something almost like pain. "She is the safest she has ever been in this building. I give you my word." Marcus studied her for a long moment, the kind of looking that has nothing to do with what's visible. Then he nodded. Once. Slow. "I'm going to finish my shift," he said. "And then I'm going to need a couple of days to figure out what I'm supposed to do about all of this." "That's fair." "It is not," he said with a tiredness that wasn't anger, "a normal situation." "No," Victoria agreed. "It isn't." He turned back toward the corridor, then stopped without turning around. "For what it's worth, whatever you two have been doing in here, she seems—" His voice caught slightly just at the edge. He pushed past it. "She seems better. She laughs more." A beat of silence. "She hasn't laughed a lot since her mother died." He walked back down the corridor before Victoria could respond, which was fortunate because Victoria needed a moment, a long private moment, to manage whatever was happening in her chest at those words. "Chag," He didn't fire her. Which was a strange thing to think because she was the CEO and he was the janitor, and firing wasn't a card he held in that particular game. But that's how it felt to Marcus in the days that followed, like he had been the one holding the judgment, and he'd chosen not to deliver it. He also didn't stop it. He told himself it was because he couldn't afford the disruption. He told himself it was because Emma was settled and he needed her settled. He told himself a lot of things at 3 a.m. when the apartment was quiet and his brain refused to turn off. What he didn't tell himself not yet was the truth, which was this: that watching his daughter with Victoria Hale had done something to the locked, grief-calcified part of him that he'd stopped expecting anyone or anything to touch. So he let it continue. Wednesday, Friday, sometimes Monday. He started coming down to the alcove himself on some of those nights, not to interrupt, but to be there. He'd settle against the far wall with his own work forms to fill out a training manual he was supposed to have read 3 weeks ago, and he would half listen to Emma and Victoria, and the three of them existed in that small space in a way that made almost no sense and somehow made complete sense at the same time. Gradually, Marcus started to understand Victoria Hale in the way you can only understand a person when you've watched them be gentle with someone they don't owe gentleness to. She was precise. She chose her words carefully, not because she was cold, but because she had been misunderstood enough times that she'd learned to say exactly what she meant and nothing more. She asked Emma questions and then actually listened to the answers, all of them, even the sprawling circular 7-sentence answers that ended somewhere completely different from where they started. She never talked down to the child. She never simplified herself into something smaller to make Emma comfortable. She was just herself. And Emma received that version of her like it was the most natural thing going. One Friday night, Marcus was sitting against the wall pretending to read his training manual when Emma looked up from her drawing and said entirely out of nowhere, "Miss Victoria, why don't you walk?" Marcus went still. Victoria didn't. "Because my legs don't work the way they used to," she said. Same voice, same steadiness. "Did it hurt?" Emma asked. "When they stopped." "The accident hurt, yes. For a long time." Emma nodded slowly, the way she nodded when she was processing something important. "My mom hurt too, at the end, but she tried not to show me." Victoria was quiet for a moment. "She sounds like she was very brave." "She was." Emma picked up her purple crayon. "Are you brave?" Marcus stopped breathing. Victoria's answer, when it came, was the quietest thing he'd ever heard her say. "I'm trying to be." Right. Emma accepted this with complete seriousness, the way she accepted most important things, and went back to her drawing. Marcus went back to his manual and didn't read a single word for 20 minutes. But the thing about secrets is that they require constant maintenance. They are not passive. They are hungry and exhausting, and they demand to be fed every single day with new vigilance, new caution, new awareness of every variable that might expose them. Marcus had been feeding this particular secret for months, and he was tired. The first crack came on a Thursday evening before his shift, when he was checking Emma into the basement room and heard 2 members of the cleaning crew talking in the corridor outside. "HR's been watching the overnight logs." "Since when?" "Since someone flagged an anomaly on the ground floor security feed. Said they keep seeing movement near the back elevator after 1 a.m. Marcus went very still inside the room. The other voice, "Movement like what? Like someone who's not supposed to be there." The voices moved away down the corridor. Marcus sat on the edge of the moving blanket with Emma beside him and stared at the floor for a long moment. His mind ran the numbers with the cold efficiency of a man who'd been running numbers against himself for a year and a half. Security feed. Ground floor. Back elevator. The alcove. "Daddy?" Emma was watching him. She had her mother's talent for reading a room. "Is something wrong?" "No, baby. You have your tight face." "My what?" "The face where you're scared but you don't want to say so." She patted his hand with the solemn authority of a child who has watched her father be brave and frightened simultaneously many more times than any child should. It's okay to be scared, Daddy. Mom always said that. He squeezed her hand and said nothing. That night he went to find Victoria before his shift started. She was in her office on the 32nd floor. He hadn't been up there since his first week when he'd cleaned it without seeing her, and the door was open, which surprised him. Victoria Hale's office door was famously never open. He knew this because the other overnight staff had told him on his first week with the quiet reverence of people sharing institutional mythology. He knocked on the frame. She looked up from her desk. Her expression shifted slightly when she saw him, not surprised exactly, but attentive in a different way than she was attentive to most things. "Mr. Reed, I need to talk to you." He stepped inside. "There are people asking about the security feed, the back elevator. They've seen movement." Her expression didn't change. "I know. You know. I received a report from building security 2 days ago." She set down her pen. "They flagged the footage and sent it to me directly because anything on the executive security feed goes to me first. I reviewed it before it went anywhere else." Marcus stared at her. And I told them it was me. I told them I've been in the habit of coming down to the ground floor at night, which is true." A pause. "I didn't mention anything else." He stood there in the doorway of her enormous office and felt something loosen slightly in the tightrope he'd been walking. Then felt it tighten again, because the tightrope was always there, always taut, and one loosened knot didn't change the overall tension. "That buys us time," he said. "It doesn't fix anything." "No," Victoria said. "It doesn't. HR is going to start asking questions regardless. Someone's going to look at the full logs eventually, and they're going to see patterns they can't explain. Probably." "Ms. Hale." He stepped further into the room. "I need you to tell me honestly what happens to me if this comes out, if someone finds out I've been bringing Emma here." She looked at him steadily. "The official policy is termination." The word landed like a stone. "Immediate termination," she continued, "for any employee found in violation of the unauthorized personnel clause. Yes." She held his gaze. "That is the official policy." "Right." He exhaled. "Right. So I need to—" "I'm not finished," she said. He stopped. "The official policy," Victoria said, "exists because that clause was written to prevent theft, industrial espionage, and liability exposure. It was not written with the situation of a single parent and a 6-year-old in mind." She folded her hands on the desk. "If the situation were to come to my attention through official channels, I would have discretion in how I responded to it." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Are you telling me you'd protect my job?" "I'm telling you that I'm the final authority on personnel decisions in this company, and that the law gives me significant discretion in circumstances that don't fit standard protocol." A beat. "I'm also telling you that I would not allow a man to lose his livelihood because he refused to leave his daughter alone at midnight." He studied her face, the precision of her, the careful walls she built from words. "Why?" he asked. It came out simpler than he intended. She looked at him for a long moment before she answered. "Because she told me her mother used to make blueberry pancakes on Saturday mornings," Victoria said. "And she told me it's the thing she misses most that she can't explain. And I know exactly what it means to miss something that doesn't have proper words." She looked down at her desk. "I know exactly what that feels like." The office was very quiet. "Ms. Hale," Marcus said slowly, "how long have you been coming down to that building at night before Emma? Before any of this?" A long pause. 3 years, she said. Marcus absorbed that. 3 years of quiet wheels in empty corridors. 3 years of roaming a building that stayed still while she couldn't. "You couldn't sleep," he said. "I could never sleep." She picked up her pen, set it down again. "After the accident, after everything changed. The penthouse is very—" She stopped. "Large," she finished, like it was a clinical observation. He understood what she meant. He understood it from his own apartment, from the specific size of a space when the person who used to fill half of it was gone. Emma helps, he said. Not a question. She helps, Victoria said quietly. Yes. Something complicated moved between them. In that moment, not quite understanding, not quite friendship, but something in the neighborhood of both. Two people recognizing in each other the specific shape of a wound that doesn't close all the way. Marcus straightened, put his hands in his pockets. I'm going to go start my shift. All right. Ms. Hale. He paused at the door. Thank you, for the feed, for handling that. Don't thank me yet, she said. If HR pushes further, the calculus gets more complicated. I know. He glanced back at her, at this woman behind her enormous desk in her enormous office with the city spread out behind her, through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the quiet around her, so thick you could almost see it. Does it always feel this big, your office? She looked at him with an expression he didn't know her face was capable of making, something unguarded and almost wry and just barely sad. Every single night, she said. He nodded once and left her there. He thought about that answer for the rest of his shift while he buffed the lobby floors and emptied the 31st floor trash and cleaned the glass on the conference room doors. He thought about what it cost a person to admit a thing like that, to say every single night without looking away. He thought about the way Emma had said you can sit here. It's less quiet when someone's next to you, and the way Victoria had gone still for just a moment before she answered. The way a person goes still when something touches the exact spot they've been guarding. He thought about Diane, who used to say that loneliness wasn't about being alone. It was about being surrounded by everything that reminded you of what was missing. By the time he came down to the basement at 3 a.m., Emma was already asleep. The book closed properly this time, the lamp off. She'd even folded the top corner of the blanket down, the way Diane used to fold the bed sheets. Marcus didn't know when she'd started doing that. And the first time he'd noticed it months ago, he'd had to go stand in the corridor for a few minutes by himself. He stood in the doorway now and watched his daughter sleep. He thought about what HR would find if they kept looking. He thought about the cost of being found out versus the cost of pulling Emma away from the only thing that had made her laugh again. He thought about Victoria Hale saying 3 years like it was a simple fact about the weather. He turned off the light, closed the door softly, and decided something without quite deciding it, the way the most consequential choices sometimes happen, not as a declaration, but as a slow, quiet settling into what was already true. He wasn't going to run. He wasn't going to move Emma to a different floor, a different room, a different arrangement designed to erase the pattern the security feed had found. He was going to trust the woman in the wheelchair who had kept their secret for 6 weeks before he even knew she was keeping it. And somewhere above him, 32 floors up, Victoria Hale sat at a desk in a very large office and stared at the city and waited for dawn, the way she always waited for dawn, counting the hours until the building filled back up with noise and she no longer had to hear her own silence. Neither of them knew in those separate darknesses that HR was not done asking questions, and that the answer they would eventually find would put every fragile, improbable thing they'd built in that midnight alcove directly in the path of everything that could destroy it. The HR report landed on Victoria's desk on a Monday morning, and she read it the way she read everything, straight through. No pauses, no visible reaction. Then she read it again. It was thorough. She had to give them that. Whoever had compiled it had been careful, methodical, and entirely too good at their job. The report documented 11 separate instances of what it described as unauthorized personnel activity in the ground floor corridor between the hours of midnight and 2 a.m. over the preceding 8 weeks. The security footage had been cross-referenced with the employee badge log. The badge log showed Marcus Reed's access card being used on the service stairwell door, down then up then down again in a pattern inconsistent with standard janitorial routes. And then on page 4, there was a photograph. It was grainy, pulled from the back elevator camera, and it showed the alcove from the angle of the elevator doors. You couldn't see faces clearly, but you could see a small figure on the bench and a wheelchair beside it, and the general shape of an adult standing nearby. The report's conclusion, typed in clean corporate language, recommended an immediate investigation into potential policy violations by overnight maintenance staff and flagged the CEO's presence as a related matter requiring clarification. Victoria set the report face down on her desk. She pressed her fingertips together and sat very still for a moment, which was what she did, instead of the things she actually felt. She had gotten very good at this, at taking the feeling and converting it into stillness, into precision, into a controlled response that showed nothing and decided everything. But this was harder than most things she'd had to convert, because on page 4 of that report, in a grainy security photograph, was something that looked from the right angle, in the right light, like a family. And someone was about to use it to destroy a man's livelihood. She picked up her phone and called her head of HR before 9 a.m. "I've read the report," she said when Carol Jennings picked up. "Ms. Hale, I was going to come to you this morning I want the investigation paused." A silence. "Paused. Pending my direct review. The footage you flagged involves my movements in the building, Carol. I have a right to review how my own presence is being documented before any formal process begins." "Of course, but the employee." "Pending my direct review," Victoria repeated. Same tone, no inflection. The tone she used when a decision had been made, and what came next was simply the management of its execution. "Yes, Ms. Hale." She hung up. Then she sat in her office for a long time, looking at nothing in particular, and did something she almost never did during business hours. She thought about Emma. Marcus found the note in his locker at 11:45 that night, 20 minutes before his shift started. It was on Hale Industries' letterhead, which made his stomach drop before he even read it, because nothing good had ever arrived on corporate letterhead for him. The note was handwritten, which surprised him. He hadn't expected Victoria Hale to have handwriting somehow, or at least not handwriting like this, precise and slightly angular like the letters were measuring themselves. "Mr. Reed, HR has a report. I've paused it. We need to speak before your shift. Come to the 32nd floor. VH. He read it twice. Then he folded it, put it in his pocket, and went to get Emma settled in the basement room. "You're doing your tight face again," Emma observed as he fixed her blanket. "I know. Is it the scared kind or the tired kind?" "Both tonight, Bug." She considered this. "Want me to come with you?" "No." He kissed her forehead. "I want you to stay here and read your book and not open the door for anyone." "Anyone," she confirmed. "Anyone. What if Ms. Victoria knocks?" He paused at the door. "Ms. Victoria won't be coming tonight." Emma accepted this with the equanimity of a child who trusts her parent even when she can see clearly that he is holding something difficult. "Okay, Daddy." He took the elevator to 32 Chautauqua. Victoria was at her desk when he came in, but she wasn't working. She was sitting in the way she sometimes sat in the alcove, not performing anything, not managing anything, just existing in a space which on a CEO looked vaguely alarming because most people in positions like hers could not stop performing themselves even when no one was watching. She had 2 folders open on her desk. She turned them to face him when he sat down across from her. "The report on the left is what HR compiled," she said. "The folder on the right is what I've drafted in response. I want you to read both." He read both. It took him 6 minutes. He was aware while reading of the sound of his own breathing slower than it should have been deliberate, because he was holding it together through the same mechanism he'd been using for 14 months, and the mechanism was reliable, but not infinite. The HR report was worse than he'd feared. Not because it was inaccurate, it was largely accurate, but because it was written in the language of institutional process, which stripped context from everything it touched and left only the bare skeleton of facts, arranged to support a predetermined conclusion. In the language of that report, Marcus Reed was an employee who had violated policy. Full stop. The folder on the right was different. Victoria had written 3 pages. They were not corporate in tone. They were direct specific, and they told a version of events that was completely true and completely different from the HR report's version, not because it changed the facts, but because it included all the facts, including the ones the report had not had access to. She had written about Emma, about what Emma had been doing in the building, about what the nocturnal meetings had been. She had written about Marcus's situation, the loss of his wife, the cost of childcare, the absence of alternatives in terms that were so clear and human that Marcus had to look away from the page for a moment when he got to that part. And she had written in the final paragraph in the same precise, angular handwriting. The question before this company is not whether a rule was technically broken. The question is what kind of company we are. I have reviewed this situation personally, and I find no cause for formal disciplinary action. This matter is closed under my authority as CEO, Victoria Hale. Marcus set the folder down. He looked at her. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I know. This puts your name on it, officially. I know that too. The board works for me," she said. "Not the other way around. Whatever they have to say about my judgment, they can say it at the quarterly meeting." She folded her hands. "Your job is safe, Mr. Reed. You have my word in writing." He sat with that for a moment. The relief was real. He felt it physically, something releasing in his back and shoulders that he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it was weight. But under the relief was something else, something more complicated. Victoria. It was the first time he'd used her first name. He hadn't planned to. It came out because nothing else fit the size of what he was trying to say. "What is this actually about? Because you could have handled this a dozen other ways. You could have just buried the report. You didn't need to write 3 pages. She was quiet for a moment. "No," she said. "I didn't." "So why?" She looked at the folders on the desk rather than at him. "Because I wanted there to be a record," she said. "Not for the company, for myself." A pause. "I wanted there to be something written down that said that this happened and it mattered, and I didn't pretend it didn't." Marcus waited. "I've spent 3 years," she said, "pretending things don't matter. It's very efficient. It keeps everything running smoothly. The company performs well. The board is happy no one has to deal with the inconvenience of my—" She stopped, started again. "Emma asked me last Wednesday if I was lonely." Marcus went still. "She asked me the way she asks everything," Victoria continued. "Like the answer is just information, like it's not a grenade." Something moved across her face. "I told her sometimes, and she said, I get lonely too, but then I talk to you and it goes away for a while. And then she just went back to her drawing." Victoria looked up. "She's 6 years old," she said. "And she is the only person in 3 years who has said something like that to me. The only person who has been in a room with me and made the room feel like a different size." She pressed her lips together. "So yes, I wrote 3 pages, because I'm not pretending anymore that this doesn't matter." The office was very still. Marcus looked at this woman, this precise, careful, lonely woman who controlled a billion-dollar company and couldn't sleep in her own penthouse, and had been roaming the corridors of a building at 1 in the morning for 3 years, because it was better than the silence, and felt something in his chest move that he hadn't expected to feel for anyone for a very long time. "She talks about you," he said. "Emma, at home. She asks me if I think you're okay. She says she worries about you being upstairs by yourself." Victoria made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite the opposite. "She's 6. She's her mother's daughter," Marcus said simply. "Diane worried about everyone, every stray, every stranger, every person at the edge of the room who looked like they needed someone to notice them." He looked at his hands. "Emma has that. I don't know how it survived everything that happened, but it did." "She's remarkable," Victoria said quietly. "She is." Marcus looked up. "And she's also becoming very attached to you, which means I need to know something." "Ask." "What happens after this? After the report is buried and the heat dies down and everything goes back to routine? What does this look like? Because I can't let her get attached to something that disappears. She's already lost." His voice caught at the edge. He pushed through it. "She's already lost the most important person in her world. I cannot let her lose someone else." Victoria held his gaze and did not look away. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "You say that now." "I say that because it's true." Her voice was steady in the way of a person who has chosen what to do with something and is no longer uncertain about it. "I'm aware of what this is. I'm aware of what she is to me. And I'm aware that awareness alone doesn't protect a child." She paused. "But I'm also telling you that the last 3 months are the first time in 3 years I have genuinely wanted to be somewhere. Not because I had to be. Not because my schedule required it. Because I wanted to be in that alcove with that child and her book, and that wanting felt like something I'd forgotten was possible." Marcus said nothing. "I'm not asking you to trust me completely," Victoria said. "I understand why you can't. I'm asking you to trust me enough. One day at a time, if that's what it takes." He nodded slowly. He was about to speak when his phone buzzed the alarm he kept for shift, start the one that said if you're not moving right now, you're already behind. He stood. "I have to start." "I know." He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. At the door he stopped because apparently this was where he processed things in doorways on the way out, when his body was already moving, but his mind hadn't finished yet. "She drew a picture last week," he said without turning around. "Of the 3 of us, in the alcove. She labeled it, 'My Family.'" He heard the small, sharp intake of breath behind him. He kept walking. The picture hung on the refrigerator in their apartment, held up by a strawberry magnet Emma had picked out at a dollar store back when dollar stores were a treat rather than a necessity. Marcus saw it every morning when he came home from his shift in the gray pre-dawn light, still in his work clothes making coffee that he'd drink in 3 large swallows before collapsing for a few hours of sleep. He looked at it differently now. Emma had drawn 3 figures. Marcus was tall and stick-shaped with a mop. Victoria's wheelchair was rendered with enormous care. She'd clearly put real effort into getting the wheels right. Both circles perfectly round with little lines radiating outward for spokes. Victoria herself was smiling a smile that took up most of her face. Above the 3 of them, in Emma's best careful letters, she had written, "My Family." The spelling was wrong. The picture was right. Marcus drank his coffee and looked at it and thought about the word that had come out of Victoria's mouth so quietly in that office, wanting. The way she'd said it like it was something she'd excavated from a long-buried place. The way it had sounded in her voice, careful and raw and slightly disbelieving, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to admit it. He understood that. He understood it in his bones. Wanting was terrifying when you'd lost the last thing you wanted. He was still thinking about it 3 days later on a Thursday night, when everything came apart. Rag. It started with a gala. He hadn't known there was a gala. The third-floor events team had set it up, which was a different crew from the overnight cleaning staff, and communication between the two was in the grand tradition of large corporate organizations, essentially non-existent. Marcus arrived for his shift to find the lobby full of catering staff, florists, and a sound team doing a check that was rattling the windows, and a building manager he'd never seen before, standing in the middle of it all with a clipboard and a headset. "Overnight crew starts at midnight tonight," the man said, barely looking up. "All non-event personnel are to remain below the 3rd floor until the function concludes." "What function?" Marcus asked. "Quarterly stakeholder reception, 32nd floor." The manager moved on. 32nd floor, Victoria's floor. Marcus ran the math. The gala meant the building would be full of people, board members, investors, executives, until at least midnight. His normal route was already disrupted. He needed to get Emma settled in the basement before any of those people started wandering the lower floors, and he needed to do it fast, and he needed to do it without running into anyone from the event. He got Emma down without incident. He started his modified route staying below the 3rd floor the way he'd been told, and everything was fine until 11:47 p.m., when he came back to the basement room to check on her and found the door open. The blanket folded. The book face down. He stood in the doorway and felt the specific cold that a parent feels when the place where their child is supposed to be is empty. It was not panic. Panic was loud, and this was quiet. This was the quiet of a person who has already survived the worst thing and now moves through fear with a terrible efficiency. He went looking. She wasn't in the alcove, she wasn't in the second-floor corridor, she wasn't near the service elevator. He went to the lobby, and stopped. The gala was still going. Through the glass doors of the main elevator bank, Marcus could see the party winding down, people in evening clothes carrying champagne flutes, conversations in clusters, the kind of event where everyone said what they came to say. And now they're all just waiting for someone else to leave first so they can. And in the center of the lobby, visible through the glass, was Emma. She had found her way up somehow the service stairs he'd figure out, later the ones without a badge lock on the lobby-level door. She was in her star pajamas, barefoot, and she was standing completely still in the middle of the marble floor, looking at the crowd, not afraid, but searching the way she looked when she was trying to find something specific in a cluttered room. Marcus pushed through the doors. He was across the lobby in 10 steps, already crouching down to her level, already reaching for her, already forming the words that were calm on the surface and terrified underneath. And then Emma pointed. Her arm went straight out. Her finger aimed across the lobby toward the elevator bank on the far side where a cluster of board members stood talking to someone in a wheelchair. "Mommy," Emma said, not loudly, just clearly. The word fell into a pocket of quiet that happened to exist between one song ending and another, starting on the gala's sound system, and it landed in that quiet, and it carried. Several heads turned. One of the board members, a man Marcus vaguely recognized from the portrait gallery. The kind of face that belonged to a name that meant money, turned and stared at the child in star pajamas, standing in the middle of the lobby floor. And Victoria Hale in her wheelchair turned and looked at Emma from across the marble lobby. And the expression on her face when she saw the child was the most unguarded thing Marcus had ever seen on a human face. Not the shock of the lobby, not the weight of the board members around her. Just Emma. Just the sight of Emma. Like the rest of it wasn't happening at all. The board member looked from the child to Victoria. His voice came out loud in the quiet, carrying the particular tone of a man who is accustomed to asking questions that are really demands. "Victoria, who is this child? What is she doing here?" Victoria did not answer immediately. She was looking at Emma. And Emma, 6 years old, barefoot, entirely unbothered by the gala, or the board members, or the marble lobby, or any of it, was looking back at her with the simple absolute certainty of a child who has located exactly the person she was looking for. "That's her," Emma told Marcus, as if he hadn't been standing right there. "That's the woman I told you about, Daddy." A pause. "The one who helps me miss Mommy less." The lobby was completely silent. Marcus looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Emma, and somewhere in the space between them, across the marble floor, under the lights of a quarterly stakeholder reception, surrounded by people who were never supposed to know any of this existed. Something that had been building for 3 months, in midnight alcoves and quiet conversations, and a child's careful drawings, finally arrived at the moment it could no longer be contained. The board member cleared his throat. "I'll ask again," he said. "Who is this child?" Victoria turned to look at him, and the expression on her face was one Marcus had never seen her wear before. Not the controlled composure, not the boardroom armor, not the careful blankness she used to manage the distance between herself and the world. She looked for just a moment like a woman who had decided that she was done pretending something wasn't true. "She's mine," Victoria said. The word hit the lobby like a stone hitting water, and Marcus still crouched at Emma's level, still holding his daughter's hand. Looked up at the woman across the room and felt the full specific weight of what had just happened settle over everything. The secret, the alcove, the months of midnight quiet. The drawing on the refrigerator with its careful wheels and its wrong spelling. He felt the weight of it, and he did not move away from it. The word landed, and nobody moved. Not the board members. Not the catering staff frozen near the edges of the room. Not the sound technician who had been reaching for his equipment and stopped with his hand suspended in midair. Not Marcus, still crouched at Emma's level with her hand in his, feeling the marble cold through his work shoes. The board member, his name was Gerald Pratt, Marcus would learn later, 20-year veteran of the Hale Industries Board, the kind of man who had strong opinions about optics and stronger opinions about anything that surprised him, looked from Victoria to Emma and back to Victoria, with the particular expression of someone whose understanding of a situation has just been completely revised. "Yours," Gerald said flatly. "In what sense?" "In the sense that I said it," Victoria replied. Her voice was level. Her hands were in her lap. She was looking at Gerald with the full force of the attention she usually reserved for quarterly earnings calls and hostile negotiations, and Marcus, watching from across the lobby, thought that whatever Gerald Pratt had been expecting from this evening, it was not this. "Victoria." Another board member, a woman silver-haired who Marcus would later learn was Ellen Marsh, the longest-serving member of the board, and the one person in that building who was not particularly afraid of Victoria Hale, stepped forward with something that was almost gentleness. "Perhaps we should move this conversation somewhere private." "Perhaps," Victoria said. She was looking at Emma now. The child had not moved. She was still holding Marcus's hand and looking at Victoria with the steady, unhurried gaze of a child who has found what she was looking for and sees no reason to be anything other than calm about it. "Hi," Emma said to the General Assembly of board members. "I'm Emma." Nobody quite knew what to do with that. Marcus stood up slowly. He kept Emma's hand in his. He walked across the marble floor, every step deliberate. Every step, the walk of a man who has decided that whatever happens next, he is not going to do it from a crouched position, until he reached the far side of the lobby where Victoria sat and Gerald stood, and Ellen hovered at the edges of something she could see was larger than it looked. He stopped in front of Victoria. She looked up at him. "You didn't have to say that," he said quietly. "I know. It's going to make everything complicated." "I know that too." Gerald cleared his throat. "I think what we need here is a clear explanation of—" "Gerald." Victoria turned to look at him. "I'll be in the office at 8 a.m. We can talk about whatever you need to talk about at 8 a.m. She turned back to Marcus. Her voice dropped just enough that it was between them only. "Take her home. She's been up past midnight and she's barefoot on marble." Emma tugged Marcus's hand. "I'm not cold." "You should be," Victoria said with the particular tone she used with Emma, the one without armor, the one that was just a person talking to a person. "Go with your dad. I'll see you soon." Emma considered this with appropriate 6-year-old gravity. Then she stepped forward, went up on her toes, and pressed her lips briefly to the side of Victoria's head, right at the temple, the way a child kisses a parent who is sitting down. The boardroom went absolutely silent. Victoria did not move. Emma stepped back and reclaimed Marcus's hand, as if she had simply completed a task she'd identified needed doing, and looked up at her father. "Okay," she said. "We can go now." Marcus looked at Victoria one more time. Something passed between them that had no words attached to it. Something that had been building since a rainy corridor and a wheelchair and a child who knocked on armrests like they were front doors. Then he picked Emma up, settled her against his shoulder, and walked out of the lobby. Behind him, he heard Gerald Pratt begin talking in the sharp, compressed tone of a man who has just lost control of a situation he didn't know he was managing. He heard Ellen Marsh's quieter voice cutting through. He heard the gala beginning to disassemble itself into murmured conversations and the clatter of departing catering carts. He did not hear Victoria's voice again, but he felt somehow that she was all right. Oi. Emma fell asleep in the car on the way home, which was a mercy because it meant Marcus had 30 minutes of silence in which to think about what had just happened without anyone asking him questions he didn't have answers to. What had just happened was this: the secret was out. Not partially, not maybe. Out in front of 12 board members and approximately 40 gala attendees, and whoever had been watching from the catering team and the elevator bank and the perimeter of the lobby. Out in the specific way that things are out when there is no plausible version of events that makes them not out. Victoria had said she's mine. He turned that over in the silence of the car with Emma's head against the window and the city moving past outside, and he tried to figure out what he felt about it. He felt unexpectedly something that was not fear. He recognized fear well enough by now to know when it wasn't there. What was there instead was something more like the feeling he'd had the night he decided not to run from the security camera situation, a settling. A slow, reluctant recognition that something had become true, regardless of whether he had chosen it. Emma had called Victoria Mommy in a lobby full of board members, and Victoria had said she's mine. And Marcus was sitting in a car at midnight with his sleeping daughter and no clear idea of what tomorrow looked like, and he was not afraid. Complicated? Yes. Uncertain? Absolutely. But not afraid. He carried Emma up to the apartment, got her into bed without waking her, and stood in the kitchen making coffee. He didn't need looking at the refrigerator. The drawing was still there. My family. The stick figure with the mop, the carefully drawn wheels, the enormous smiling faces. Emma had added something since the last time he'd really looked at it. A small shape he hadn't noticed before, tucked into the corner of the picture near Victoria's wheelchair. He leaned closer. It was a star. The same stars that were on Emma's pajamas. He stood there for a long time, looking at it. 8 a.m. came quickly, and Victoria was already at her desk when Gerald Pratt and Ellen Marsh arrived. Gerald was carrying a coffee and the carefully controlled expression of a man who had spent the night preparing arguments. Ellen was carrying nothing. Gerald sat. Ellen sat. Victoria waited. "I'll be direct," Gerald said. "Please," Victoria said. "What we witnessed last night represents a significant concern from a governance standpoint. An unauthorized child in the building, an apparent relationship between you and an employee, the use of company resources." Gerald. Ellen's voice was quiet but specific. "Let her speak." Gerald stopped. Victoria looked at both of them. Then she did something she had not done in a board-level conversation. In 3 years, she set down her pen, moved the folders on her desk to one side, and folded her hands in her lap rather than on the surface in front of her. It was a small gesture. It meant she was not managing this conversation. She was having it. "His name is Marcus Reed," she said. "He's been an overnight maintenance employee here for 8 months. His wife died 14 months ago. He's a single father with no family in the city and no affordable childcare options. He has been bringing his daughter to the building at night because the alternative was leaving a 6-year-old alone in an apartment at midnight." She let that land. "I became aware of the situation approximately 6 weeks before HR did," she continued. "I reviewed the security footage before it went to formal channels, and I made the decision to handle it personally. I documented that decision. You can find the record in the personnel files." Gerald was quiet for a moment. "And the relationship between you and the child? What about it?" Victoria. Gerald set down his coffee. "You told a room full of stakeholders that she was yours." "She didn't call me that," Victoria said. "Her father said she's the woman who helps her miss her mother less." She paused. "She called me mommy in the lobby, yes. That word came from her, not from me. And when someone asked me to explain what she was to me, I told the truth as I understand it." She held Gerald's gaze. "She matters to me. I'm not going to stand in a lobby and pretend otherwise to protect the optics of a quarterly reception." "The board," Gerald began, "will have questions, and—" "The board can have questions," Ellen interrupted calmly. She had been watching Victoria with an expression that Gerald clearly couldn't read, and that Victoria could, because Ellen Marsh had known her for 7 years, had served on this board through the accident and the recovery, and the 3 years of controlled, efficient grief that Victoria had converted into an extraordinary financial performance. "I think," Ellen said, "that the more important question is what you intend to do now." "Now," Victoria said, "I'm going to call Marcus Reed and ask him to come in this afternoon, and I'm going to tell him what I should have told him more clearly 3 months ago." "Which is?" Victoria was quiet for a moment. "That I don't want to go back to before," she said. "That I understand what that costs and what it asks of him, and that I'm not saying it because of last night or because of what happened in the lobby. I'm saying it because it's been true for a while now, and I'm done being careful with it." Gerald looked at Ellen. Ellen looked at Gerald. Something passed between them that was the product of 7 years on a board together, a whole conversation in one exchange of glances. Ellen stood up. "Gerald and I will handle the stakeholder follow-up," she said. "I'd suggest a brief statement, nothing elaborate. Something about the company's commitment to employee welfare." She looked at Victoria, which incidentally would carry more weight if it were backed by an actual policy. Victoria looked at her. "What kind of policy?" "Child care support for working parents, emergency child care funds, something concrete." Ellen picked up her bag. "Half your overnight staff is in exactly the position that man is in, Victoria. You know that. You've known it for a while. The question is what you're going to do about it now that you can't pretend you don't." She walked to the door. Gerald followed, still carrying his coffee and the slightly dazed expression of someone who had come prepared for a battle and found instead a conversation. At the door, Ellen paused. "She's a lovely child," she said. "Not a strategic observation. Just a fact." "She is," Victoria said. Ellen nodded once and left. Neg. Marcus came in at 2 in the afternoon, which was early for him. He normally slept until at least noon after an overnight shift. He looked it. There were shadows under his eyes, and he'd clearly showered quickly, and he was wearing jeans and a jacket that he'd grabbed because he didn't own anything between work clothes and the one suit he kept for funerals. He sat across from Victoria's desk. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Where's Emma?" she asked. "Neighbors, the one 2 floors down. She likes Emma. She watches her on short notice sometimes." "Good." Victoria paused. "How did Emma seem this morning?" "Fine," Marcus said. "Happy, actually. She woke up and told me she'd had a dream that we all had breakfast together." He rubbed his jaw. "She wanted to know if you like blueberry pancakes." Something in Victoria's chest did something complicated. "I don't know," she said. "I haven't had blueberry pancakes in a long time." "Diane's recipe is in a notebook in my kitchen," Marcus said. "Emma found it last month. She carries it around like it's precious." He looked at his hands. "Which I suppose it is." The silence between them was not uncomfortable. It had stopped being uncomfortable some time ago. Marcus couldn't have said exactly when, but somewhere between the security footage conversation and the page 4 photograph and the 2 folders on the desk, the silence between them had changed its character. "I need to say some things," Victoria said. "All right. Some of them are going to be not easy for me to say. I want you to let me finish before you respond." "Okay." She looked at the window rather than at him. Outside, the city was doing what the city did, moving building, converting itself from one thing into the next with the restless energy of a place that does not know how to stop. "Before the accident," she began, "I was a different kind of person. Not better, just different. I had plans that weren't about the company. I wanted things that had nothing to do with earnings or board approval or market position." She paused. "I wanted a family. I wanted what you had. I wanted someone to cook Sunday lunches with. I wanted a child who would carry a notebook around like it was precious." Her voice stayed level, but only through visible effort. "And then the accident happened, and the recovery was very long and very painful. And by the end of it, I had convinced myself that those things I wanted were things I was no longer allowed to want. Because I was in a wheelchair. Because people looked at me differently. Because I had enough money to build any life I chose, and I chose to build a fortress instead. Because fortresses don't ask you to be okay with what you've lost." Marcus said nothing. He was listening the way she had taught Emma, by watching with his whole attention without rushing ahead. "Emma doesn't see the wheelchair," Victoria said. "Or rather, she sees it the way she sees everything, as just a thing that is. Not a tragedy, not an inspiration, not a symbol of anything. Just wheels that go quiet so they don't wake anyone up." She turned from the window. "I don't know how to describe what that is like. To be seen like that. To just be a person in a chair in an alcove reading about spiders." She looked at him directly. "I'm not the same person I was before. I have scars. I have 3 years of grief. I've packed down so tight I'm not entirely sure what's underneath it. I'm not easy to know, and I'm not always good at asking for what I need, and there are days when the fortress goes back up without my permission." "I know," Marcus said. "I'm not finished." "I know that too. I wasn't disagreeing." She exhaled. "I don't want to go back to before last night. I don't want to go back to the alcove being a secret, and you not knowing whether your job is safe, and Emma having to hide what she feels because it's inconvenient for the people around her." She straightened. "I'm not asking you to make any decision right now. I'm not asking you to feel anything you don't feel. I'm just telling you that last night when that board member asked who Emma was, the only answer that felt true was the one I gave." She held his gaze. "She matters to me. You both do. And I am done letting the size of that sit in an alcove at midnight where nobody can see it." Marcus was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was even, but only the way a river is even calm on the surface and moving underneath. When Diane died, he said, "I made myself a promise that I wasn't going to let Emma grow up in a house where people left, where things disappeared, where she had to keep losing things." He looked at his hands. "And then I walked into this building 8 months ago, and my daughter knocked on a stranger's wheelchair like it was a front door, and the stranger let her in." He looked up. "I've been watching you for 3 months, in the alcove, in your office, in the lobby last night." He paused. "You're not someone who leaves." Victoria said nothing. "You've been alone in this building for 3 years," he said, "and you haven't left. You've been in pain that you converted into efficiency, and you haven't left. Last night you had a room full of board members, and you could have handled it 100 ways that protected you, and you didn't." He met her eyes. "You stayed." "I stayed," she said quietly. "Then we have something to talk about," Marcus said. "Not all at once, not right now, but we have something to talk about." Victoria looked at him. For the first time in 3 years in her enormous office in her enormous building, she did not feel the size of the room around her. "Blueberry pancakes," she said. He blinked. "What?" Emma asked if I like them. "Tell her." She stopped. "Tell her I'd like to find out." Something happened to Marcus Reed's face, then a slow, reluctant, completely real thing that had not happened on that face in 14 months. It wasn't a full smile. It was something smaller and more honest than a smile. It was the expression of a man setting down something he'd been carrying for too long. "Saturday morning," he said. "Our apartment, 8 o'clock. I'll be there." "She'll be up at 6, he warned. "She'll want to help make them." "Good," Victoria said, and she meant it in ways she didn't have words for yet. Marcus stood. He paused at the doorway, where apparently every important thing that couldn't be said while seated got said. "For the record," he told her, "Emma doesn't need someone perfect. She's never needed that." He looked back. "She just needs someone who shows up." He left. Victoria sat at her desk for a long time after he was gone. She did not pick up her pen. She did not open her laptop. She did not reach for any of the mechanisms she had built over 3 years to fill the silence. She let the silence be there. And for the first time, it didn't feel like something she was surviving. It felt like something she was wading through on the way to somewhere else. Saturday morning arrived the way good things sometimes do, quietly, without announcement, carrying more weight than it appeared to from the outside. Marcus was up at 5:30 because he was always up at 5:30. His body long since calibrated to the rhythms of overnight shifts and the particular alertness of a man who had learned that sleep was a resource, not a right. He cleaned the apartment with the focused efficiency of someone who has spent 8 months cleaning other people's spaces and cannot turn that part of his brain off. He moved the laundry off the kitchen chair. He found a tablecloth he hadn't used since Diane's last birthday. Pale yellow, slightly wrinkled, and spread it on the table, because it seemed like the kind of morning that deserved a tablecloth. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway at 6:04 in her star pajamas, her hair doing something architectural on one side. "Is she coming?" Emma asked. First words of the morning. No preamble. She said she would. That means yes. Emma climbed onto the kitchen chair and pulled the notebook toward her. Diane's recipe notebook, the one with the water stain on the cover and the pages soft from handling. She opened it to a page that had a small crayon mark at the top, put there so she could find it fast. I want to help with the blueberries. You always want to help with the blueberries. Because I'm good at it. You eat more than you put in the bowl. That's quality control, Emma said seriously. Marcus looked at her, this small person in her pajamas with her grandmother's nose and her mother's eyes, and some third quality that was entirely her own. This quality of absolute certainty that the people she loved were worth loving, and that love itself was a straightforward and obvious thing that only adults found complicated. He looked at her and felt, as he sometimes felt on ordinary mornings, the full specific weight of how lucky he was that she existed. Go brush your hair, he said. She'll be here at 8. It's 6. I know. Go brush your hair. Emma slid off the chair and disappeared down the hallway, already talking to herself about blueberries. Marcus made coffee and looked at the refrigerator and the drawing that was still there, still held up by the strawberry magnet, the careful wheels and the enormous smiling faces, and my family in letters that were wrong and right at the same time. He thought about what Victoria had said in her office. The things she'd laid out on the desk, the way she'd laid out those 2 folders deliberately with precision because she wanted there to be a record. I have scars. I have 3 years of grief I've packed down so tight, I'm not entirely sure what's underneath it. He thought about the way she'd said I'd like to find out when Emma asked about blueberry pancakes, and the 2 meanings that phrase carried without her intending it. He thought about Diane, who would have found this entire situation both improbable and completely correct, because Diane had believed with a conviction that was almost aggressive that people found each other for reasons, and that the universe was not subtle when it decided 2 people needed to be in the same room. Well, he thought at her. You picked a janitor job in a billion-dollar building. I'm choosing to take that personally. He was still smiling faintly at nothing when the intercom buzzed at 7:58. Yes. Victoria had not been in an apartment building elevator in a very long time that wasn't her own. Her building had a private elevator. Before that, before the accident, she had been the kind of person who climbed stairs without thinking about it, who had never once considered whether a space was accessible because the question had never applied to her. It applied now. It applied in the specific daily relentless way that it applied to approximately 61 million Americans who moved through a world designed by people who had not considered them, and Victoria had spent 3 years converting that friction into something she could manage alone rather than something she talked about. Marcus's building was not inaccessible. It had a ramp and an elevator. The elevator was small and the hallway was narrow, and she had to angle the chair twice to get to the apartment door, and she did it without making anything of it because she had learned to do most things without making anything of them. She knocked. The door opened in approximately 1 second, which meant Emma had been standing on the other side of it waiting. You came, Emma said. I said I would. I know. Emma stepped back. Come in. I picked the blueberries already. Daddy says I did quality control. She paused. I ate some. Quality control is important work, Victoria said. She followed Emma into the apartment. It was small, smaller than Victoria's kitchen, which she was aware of in a way she tried to make neutral and factual rather than comparative. It was clean and warm, and it smelled like coffee and something that might have been the ghost of 1,000 cooked meals. There were books stacked on the side table, and Emma's drawings taped to the wall in a loose gallery that ran the length of the hallway, and on the refrigerator she saw it immediately. The way you see things you've been told about and find that they're more than you expected. The drawing. My family. The wheels. The mop. The enormous smiling faces. She stopped in front of it. Marcus came out of the kitchen drying his hands on a dish towel. He watched her looking at the drawing. She did it 4 months ago, he said, right after the first time you read to her in the alcove. Victoria didn't say anything for a moment. The wheels, she finally said. She got them right. She worked on them for an hour, kept starting over because they weren't round enough. Victoria turned from the refrigerator. She looked at Marcus, and he looked at her, and the whole careful architecture of what they'd been building over the past weeks. The conversations and the silences and the 12 steps toward each other that they'd taken without calling them by that name was just there between them. In this small, warm apartment that smelled like coffee on a Saturday morning. "Tell me what to do," Victoria said. "I can measure, I can read instructions. I'm a fast learner, and I don't burn things." "Have you ever made pancakes?" "I've made decisions that led to pancakes being made." Marcus looked at her for a second. Then he laughed a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere lower than the throat, the kind that doesn't ask permission. Victoria heard it and felt something in her chest that she recognized finally for what it was. Not filling an absence, not managing a wound, just happiness. Small and specific and entirely real. "Come in here," he said. "Emma, show her the recipe." Emma was already at the counter, notebook, open crayon mark, visible at the top of the page. She pushed herself up on her stool and pointed at the handwriting on the page, Diane's handwriting, round and slightly tilted, the handwriting of a woman Victoria had never met and somehow felt she knew. 2 cups flour. Emma said with the authority of someone who has memorized something they consider important. 1 egg, baking powder, milk, and the blueberries go in last. Daddy says so they don't get squished. "Why don't they go in first?" Victoria asked. "Because they're delicate," Emma explained. "You have to protect the delicate things until the last minute." Marcus glanced at Victoria over Emma's head. Something passed between them in that glance. Something quiet and specific and entirely adult, and then they both looked back at Emma, who was already reaching for the measuring cup with complete confidence. Breakfast lasted 2 hours. Not because the pancakes took that long, they were done by 9, but because Emma had things to say about all of them, and because talking to Emma had a quality that neither Marcus nor Victoria could fully explain, where time moved differently, where the ordinary weight of the world became lighter, not through the absence of difficulty, but through the presence of someone who had not yet learned to be armored against it. Emma talked about school. She talked about her friend Maya, who had a dog named Biscuit, and who Emma considered the luckiest person alive. She talked about Charlotte's Web, which she had finished and which she had opinions about, that she delivered with the conviction of a book critic who has done real thinking and wants credit for it. "Charlotte dies," Emma told Victoria, as if this might be news. "I know," Victoria said. "Does that make you sad, when you think about it?" "Yes." Emma nodded, satisfied. "Me too. But Wilbur lives because she helped him. So she's still there, kind of, just different." She looked at her plate. "Like Mommy." The table was quiet. Marcus put his hand on Emma's shoulder. Emma leaned into it without looking up, and the gesture was so practiced, so automatic, so much the language of 2 people who had been holding each other up for a long time, that Victoria had to look away for a moment. "I think that's exactly right," Victoria said, when she trusted her voice. "Still there, just different." Emma looked up at her. "Do you have someone like that? Who's still there but different?" Victoria thought about it honestly. "I had people," she said. "Before the accident. Friends. Plans." She paused. "It took me a long time to figure out how to think about them as still there." "Did you figure it out?" "I'm working on it." She met Emma's eyes. "I think you've been helping." Emma accepted this as simply true, because to her it was. She picked up her fork and resumed eating, the philosophical portion of the morning apparently concluded. Marcus refilled Victoria's coffee without asking. She noticed that the not asking, the assumption of presence, of continued participation, of her being a person at this table who would want more coffee. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing. 3 weeks after the Saturday pancakes, Victoria stood in front of her company's senior management team and proposed the Hale Family Support Initiative, a comprehensive childcare fund, an emergency childcare subsidy for overnight and shift workers, and a partnership with 3 local childcare centers to provide discounted placement for employees who met income thresholds. She presented it without ceremony. She did not tell the story of Marcus and Emma. She did not make it personal. She laid out the data, the number of overnight employees who had dependents, the correlation between childcare accessibility and employee retention, the cost-benefit analysis of supporting working parents versus the cost of turnover. Because she had learned over 20 years that the most important arguments are the ones that don't require anyone to feel anything they're not ready to feel. You build the structure with numbers. You let the people fill it with meaning. But after the presentation, when the room was clearing and her director of operations was shaking her head slowly at the projected cost and muttering about budget cycles, Ellen Marsh stayed behind. "You're funding part of this yourself," Ellen said. It wasn't a question. The initial phase, yes. The board will want to know where the idea came from. Victoria began organizing her folders. "Tell them I had a conversation with a member of our overnight staff who helped me understand a gap in our employee support structure." Ellen was quiet for a moment. "That's accurate as far as it goes." "It goes far enough." Ellen picked up her bag. "How is she?" "The little girl." Victoria looked at her. "She's teaching me how to play Go Fish. She says I'm bad at it because I don't have a poker face." Ellen smiled, a real one, the kind she didn't deploy in board meetings. "And her father?" Victoria set the last folder down. She looked at the table, not at Ellen, and the pause she took was not evasive, but genuine, the pause of a person finding accurate words for something they don't want to get wrong. "He told me Emma doesn't need someone perfect," she said. "He told me she just needs someone who shows up." She looked up. "I'm showing up." Ellen nodded just once and left without saying anything else. Because sometimes the right response to a thing is simply to let it stand. Here, the company charity event was Ellen's idea, framed as a soft launch for the Family Support Initiative. A family-friendly afternoon event in the Hale Industries Plaza that employees and their families were invited to attend, with childcare providers present to discuss the new programs and food and music and the kind of organized warmth that corporations are occasionally capable of when someone with genuine intent is running the room. Marcus didn't want to go. He told Victoria this at the kitchen table on a Thursday evening. They had a Thursday evening now, which had happened the way things between them kept happening, not through a formal decision, but through a gradual settling into what was already true, while Emma was in the other room, practicing Go Fish against herself. "I'm not good at events," he said. "I'm not good at being looked at." "Nobody's going to be looking at you. Victoria, they're going to be looking at us, at the three of us. We are going to be the most looked at thing in that plaza." She considered this honestly. "Probably." "And you're still asking me to come." "I'm asking you to come," she said, "because I am done being in that building in a way that requires hiding what matters to me. I have spent 3 years using that building as a place to disappear into. I don't want to disappear anymore." She looked at him directly. "You don't have to come. I mean that. But I want you there. I want Emma there. I want—" She stopped, found the right words, came back. "I want to stand in front of the building where all of this started and be exactly what we are, without the alcove and the midnight and the keeping it small." "Okay." Marcus looked at her for a long time. "What are we?" he asked, not challenging. Asking. She didn't look away. "We're a family that nobody saw coming," she said. "Including us." He was quiet. From the other room, Emma's voice carried over. "I win again. I'm very good at this game." Marcus exhaled slowly, fully, the way a person exhales when they've been holding something for a long time and finally don't need to anymore. 8 o'clock, he said. 9, Victoria said. "Let Emma sleep in." The plaza was full by 10:30. Emma was wearing her yellow dress, the one with the small white flowers that she saved for important occasions, and had decided this was, and she had allowed Marcus to put her hair in 2 braids, which she normally resisted on the grounds of patience, but had today permitted, because she understood in the way she understood most things that this morning was worth the extra time. She held Marcus's hand on one side and Victoria's armrest on the other. Not the hand, the armrest, because she had long ago established that this was her spot, her particular way of being next to Victoria, and she saw no reason to change it. They moved through the event together. Employees stopped to talk. Childcare coordinators introduced themselves. A woman from the overnight maintenance crew. A woman Marcus had seen but never spoken to, a small woman with a tired face who had 3 kids and worked the same shift. Stopped in front of them and looked at Victoria and then at Marcus and then at the childcare information in her hand and said quietly, "Is this real, the subsidy?" "It's real," Victoria said. The woman looked at her for a moment. Not at the wheelchair, not at the CEO, just at the person. "My youngest is 4, she said. "I've been working overnight because it's the only shift where my sister can take her, and my sister just told me she can't anymore, and I didn't know what I was going to—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "Thank you." "You're welcome," Victoria said, simply, without making it anything other than what it was. The woman moved on. Marcus watched her go. Then he looked at Victoria. "You're going to make me tear up in front of the whole company," he said. "I'll pretend not to notice." Emma was watching the woman walk away. Why was she crying? She asked. "Because someone helped her when she needed it," Marcus said. Emma considered this. "Like us," she said. "Like us," Marcus agreed. They kept walking. They kept. At the far end of the plaza, someone had set up a small stage for remarks. Nothing elaborate, just a microphone and a banner with the initiative's name. Ellen Marsh had suggested Victoria say a few words. Victoria had agreed with the condition that she keep it brief, because she had learned over the years that the most powerful things she ever said were the ones she didn't labor over. She spoke for 4 minutes. She talked about the data. She talked about the gap the initiative was designed to fill. She talked about what it cost a company in turnover, in lost productivity, in plain human waste to ignore the reality of working parents. She did not tell Marcus's story. She did not tell her own. But at the end, she said this: "I've been told that this building can feel very large and very empty. I think that's true of any place that we fill with work instead of people. This initiative is an acknowledgement, formal, funded, and permanent, that people come first. The work exists to serve the people, not the other way around." She paused. "It took me longer to understand that than it should have," she said. "I'm grateful to the people who helped me see it." She did not look at Marcus and Emma in the crowd. She didn't need to. They were there. That was enough. The penthouse had been the same since the accident. She had changed nothing. Not the furniture, not the layout, not the way the light came through the east windows in the morning. In a way, she'd stopped letting herself notice, because noticing things you loved was expensive when you had decided to live as efficiently as possible. She changed one thing the week after the charity event. She framed Emma's drawing, not in a simple frame, in a proper one. The kind you take to a framing shop and spend 20 minutes selecting the mat for, because the thing inside it deserves the time. She chose a white mat and a simple dark wood frame, and she hung it on the wall in the living room of the penthouse, on the wall that faced the door, the wall you saw first when you walked in. My family. The careful wheels, the stick figure with the mop, the enormous smiling faces. She hung it at eye level. Her eye level, the level of someone in a wheelchair, the level at which she saw the world, and stood back and looked at it. The penthouse didn't feel as large as it used to. Emma saw it 2 Saturdays later when Marcus brought her up for the first time. She stood in front of it for a long moment, with her hands clasped behind her back, studying it the way she studied things she took seriously. "I made that," she said. "I know," Victoria said. "The wheels are good. They're very good." Emma turned around and looked at the room. At the windows, the high ceilings, the city spread out below. She turned back to Victoria with the expression of someone making a practical assessment. "You should get a couch that's better for reading," she said. "The one you have looks like it's for looking at, not for sitting on." "You're probably right. And a plant. Plants make a room less lonely." She said it without any weight, just information, the way she said everything important. "Mom had plants. There was one in the kitchen that she talked to." "Did it work?" Emma shrugged. The plant was fine, and Mom was happy when she talked to it. So probably yes. Victoria looked at this child, this small, complete, extraordinary person, who had knocked on her armrest like it was a front door, and walked in and refused to leave, and felt the specific texture of what her life had become now versus what it had been before. Before large and empty and efficiently maintained. Now blueberry pancakes and go fish and a drawing on the wall, and a man who refilled her coffee without asking, and a 6-year-old who had opinions about couches and plants and the therapeutic value of talking to living things. Not perfect. Nothing about it was perfect. But it was there. It was real, and it was hers. Marcus stayed late that evening. Emma fell asleep on the not ideal for reading couch with her shoes still on, which was a thing she did everywhere, as if sleep was something that happened to her rather than something she chose. He covered her with the blanket Victoria kept in the hall closet. She'd put it there 3 weeks ago, before she'd acknowledged to herself why she was doing it, and they sat together at the kitchen table with the city outside the windows going dark, and the particular quiet of a Saturday evening that has nothing left to demand of anyone. "She's going to want to redecorate this whole place," Marcus said. "I know. She has strong opinions about plants. She made several good points." He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. "I want to say something, and I don't want you to respond right away. I just want you to hear it." Victoria looked at him. "All right. I was afraid for a long time," he said. "After Diane. Not of specific things, of everything. Of caring about something and losing it. Of letting Emma get attached to anything that might disappear. Of wanting things again because wanting things was what I was doing the day Diane said her head hurt, and by Tuesday I was sitting in an ICU." He looked at his cup. "Fear is not a strategy. I knew that. I just didn't know what to do instead." He looked up. "You walked into a lobby and you held my daughter like she was worth protecting," he said. "In front of board members and security cameras and all of it. You didn't calculate it. You just did it." He held her gaze. "That's who you are. That's what I know. And I'm done being afraid of what I know." Victoria looked at him across the table. Outside, the city moved and hummed and converted itself restlessly from one moment into the next. Inside, a child slept on a couch that was wrong for reading, and a drawing hung on the wall at wheelchair height, and 2 people sat with their coffee and the accumulated weight of everything it had cost them to get to this particular table, on this particular evening, in this particular life that neither of them had planned. "Marcus," she said. "Yeah. I'm going to need help picking a plant." He smiled, not the cautious partial thing she'd seen in the early months. The full version, the one that changed the whole shape of his face. "Emma's going to want to name it. I assumed. She'll name it something ridiculous. I'm counting on it." He laughed. She laughed. Down the hall, Emma slept on, entirely unaware that she had built something in crayon in midnight alcoves in the simple, relentless offering of herself to people who needed to be reminded they were worth knowing. That would last long after the blueberries ran out, and the notebook pages softened further, and the careful wheels on the refrigerator drawing faded to something that required looking closely to see. Family is not a thing you plan. It is not a thing you qualify for, or apply for, or deserve, through the right combination of circumstances and choices. It is not about blood or status or the absence of scars. It is about who knocks, and who opens the door, and who, when every reason to leave has been laid out clearly on the table, looks at all of it and stays. Emma had knocked first. The rest of them were just learning to stay.